They hanged him at noon in Redstone Ridge, and the whole town came to watch the killer die. Caleb Vance, the gunfighter who'd left 17 men in shallow graves across 3 territories, stood on the gallows without trembling, without begging, without a single word of remorse. The rope went tight. The trapdoor opened. His neck should have snapped clean. But when they cut him down hours later, and the undertaker prepared his body for burial, something impossible happened. The dead man's chest rose. His eyes opened. And Caleb Vance, legally executed, officially deceased, took his first breath as a ghost among the living. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale travels across the frontier. The morning Caleb Vance was supposed to die began like any other execution day in Redstone Ridge, with whiskey, wagers, and the kind of cruel excitement that turned ordinary people into a mob hungry for blood. The gallows stood in the center of town square, freshly built from pine that still smelled of sap and sawdust. Children ran between the legs of their parents, playing games of tag while vendors sold roasted peanuts and hard candy. A man with an accordion played jaunty tunes that seemed obscene given the occasion. Women in their Sunday dresses clustered together, fanning themselves against the August heat, whispering behind gloved hands about the condemned man and his terrible crimes. 17 men dead, they said. Maybe more. Bodies scattered across Colorado Territory, Wyoming, and the Dakota Plains. Some shot in fair duels, others ambushed in the dark. The stories grew with each telling until Caleb Vance became something more than human, a demon in boots and spurs, death personified in dusty trail clothes. Marshal Garrett Pike stood on the platform beside the gallows, his silver badge catching the harsh midday sun. He was a hard man who'd seen his share of hangings, but there was something different about this one. Something in the way the condemned man carried himself that unsettled even Pike's weathered conscience. They brought Caleb out at 12:45. He walked without shackles. There was nowhere to run, and everyone knew it. His hands were bound behind his back with rough hemp rope that had already rubbed his wrists raw during the night in his cell. He wore the same clothes he'd been arrested in 2 weeks prior, dark trousers stained with trail dust, a collarless shirt that had once been white but now carried the gray-brown patina of too many miles between wash days, and boots so worn the leather had molded perfectly to the shape of his feet. He was 32 years old, though the hard living had carved lines around his eyes that made him look older. His hair was dark, long enough to brush his collar, and his beard was trimmed close, a vanity he'd maintained even in the cell, using a dull razor the deputy had grudgingly provided. His eyes were the color of winter ice, pale gray and unnervingly calm. The crowd pressed forward as he climbed the 13 steps to the platform. Someone shouted an obscenity. Someone else threw a rotten tomato that splattered against the scaffold post. Caleb didn't flinch. His gaze swept across the sea of faces below. Men, women, children, all gathered to watch him strangle at the end of a rope, and his expression remained absolutely neutral. Father Michaels, the town priest, stood waiting beside the noose. He was a young man, newer to Redstone Ridge, still carrying the idealism of seminary training like a coat that didn't quite fit the frontier. He held a worn Bible, pages soft from use, and his hands trembled slightly as Caleb approached. "Do you wish to confess your sins, my son?" Father Michaels asked, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, unused to conversation after days of silence. "I know what I've done, Father. So does every man I killed. A few more words won't change the weight of it." "But your soul—" "My soul's been spoken for a long time now," Caleb said quietly. "Save your breath for men who still have a chance at redemption." Marshal Pike stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. He cleared his throat and began to read in the formal monotone required by territorial law. "Caleb James Vance, you have been tried and convicted of murder in the first degree for the killing of Samuel Drummond in the town of Redstone Ridge on the 15th day of June, in the year of our Lord 1873. The territorial court has sentenced you to be hanged by the neck until dead. Do you have any last words?" The crowd fell silent. Even the accordion player stopped mid-phrase, letting the last note hang in the air before fading to nothing. Caleb turned to face the townspeople. His pale eyes moved slowly across the gathering, as if memorizing each face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried clearly across the square. I killed Sam Drummond because he drew on me first, he said flatly. Any man here who knows Sam knows he was mean drunk and meaner sober, and he'd been looking for a reason to put a bullet in me since I rode into town. When he found it, I was faster. That's the whole truth of it. You're a liar, a woman shrieked from the crowd. Martha Drummond, Sam's widow, pushed forward, her face twisted with grief and rage. You murdered my husband in cold blood. Your husband tried to shoot me in the back, ma'am, Caleb said, his tone still eerily calm. I turned around. He missed. I didn't. I'm sorry for your loss, but I won't apologize for staying alive. Enough, Marshal Pike said sharply. He nodded to the hangman, a thick-shouldered man named Hodge, who'd been brought in from Denver specifically for this execution. Redstone Ridge didn't hang men often enough to keep a permanent executioner on the payroll. Hodge moved with practiced efficiency, positioning Caleb over the trapdoor and fitting the noose around his neck. The rough hemp scratched against skin. Caleb could feel his pulse beating against the rope, quick and hard despite his outward calm. Any final prayers? Father Michaels asked desperately. Caleb shook his head once. Hodge pulled a black hood from his belt, the fabric worn soft from previous use. This'll make it easier, he said quietly, almost kindly. No, Caleb said. If these people came to watch me die, let them see it. Hodge hesitated, then shrugged and stepped back. He positioned his hand on the lever that would release the trapdoor. Marshal Pike raised his hand, preparing to give the signal. In the crowd, men stood on tiptoes to see better. Children were lifted onto shoulders. Someone had started taking bets on how long Caleb would struggle before the life finally left him. The odds favored less than 3 minutes. Martha Drummond stood in the front row, her face hard as granite, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Behind her, her 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, none older than 10, watched with wide, frightened eyes that would carry this memory for the rest of their lives. Caleb looked at them. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or sorrow. Then it was gone, replaced again by that terrible calm. Marshal Pike's hand dropped. Hodge pulled the lever. The trapdoor opened with a sound like a gunshot. Caleb Vance dropped through empty air, and the rope snapped taut with a sound that echoed across the silent square. His body jerked once, violently, then hung still. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the death throes, the desperate kicking, the awful struggle that usually accompanied a hanging. But Caleb didn't struggle. His body simply hung there, swaying slightly in the hot breeze that carried dust and the smell of unwashed bodies across the square. His face had gone dark with pooled blood, his eyes still open and staring at nothing, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. After 2 minutes, someone in the crowd called out, "He's gone! Dead as dirt!" A cheer rose from parts of the gathering. Others remained silent, disturbed by how quickly and quietly it had ended. This wasn't the spectacle they'd expected. There was something unsatisfying about a death so clean, so swift. Marshal Pike waited the required 10 minutes, then nodded to Hodge. They raised Caleb's body back up through the trapdoor and removed the noose. When they laid him on the platform, his eyes were still open, staring up at the merciless blue sky. Doc Brennan climbed the stairs, his medical bag in hand. He was an elderly man who'd been pronouncing people dead for 40 years, and he went through the motions with tired efficiency. He checked for a pulse at the wrist. Nothing. He checked the neck. Nothing. He held a small mirror under Caleb's nose and mouth, watching for any sign of breath. The glass remained clear. Dead, he announced. Time of death, 12:07 in the afternoon. The crowd began to disperse, some disappointed, others satisfied that justice had been served. The children went back to their games. The vendors packed up their unsold goods. The accordion player started another tune, this one even more cheerful than before. They loaded Caleb's body into a rough pine coffin and carried it to Harlan Good's undertaking parlor at the edge of town. Harlan was a thin, nervous man who'd inherited the business from his father and wished daily that he'd chosen literally any other profession. He didn't like death. He didn't like corpses. But he was good at his work, meticulous and respectful, even toward the bodies of executed murderers. The afternoon sun slanted through the dirty windows of the preparation room as Harlan laid out his tools. He'd need to wash the body, dress it in clean clothes, and prepare it for burial in the town cemetery. Most executed men were buried without ceremony in the potter's field, but Caleb had paid in advance for a proper burial. The money had been found in his saddlebags after his arrest, enough gold coin to cover a decent coffin, a plot, and even a simple headstone. Harlan unbuttoned Caleb's shirt, noting the scars that covered the man's torso. Knife wounds, bullet wounds, burn scars. A lifetime of violence written on skin. He'd just begun to remove the shirt when he noticed something odd. The body was still warm. That wasn't unusual immediately after death, but several hours had passed since the execution. The body should have started to cool by now, especially in the shaded parlor. Harlan frowned and pressed his hand more firmly against Caleb's chest and felt something impossible. A heartbeat. Faint, irregular, but unmistakably there. Harlan jerked his hand back as if burned. He stood frozen, staring at the corpse on his preparation table, his mind refusing to accept what his senses had just told him. He reached out again, trembling, and pressed 2 fingers against the side of Caleb's neck. There. The pulse. Weak and thready, but present. Jesus Christ, Harlan whispered. He ran to the door and shouted for his assistant, a young man named Timothy who was sweeping the front room. Get Doc Brennan, now! Run! Timothy dropped his broom and sprinted toward the doctor's office 3 blocks away. Harlan returned to the body, unable to look away from the slow rise and fall of Caleb's chest. So subtle it was almost imperceptible, but definitely there. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, Doc Brennan burst through the door, Timothy close behind him. The doctor's face was flushed from running, his medical bag clutched in one hand. "What's this nonsense about?" he began, then stopped as he saw Caleb's chest move. Doc Brennan approached the table slowly, as if approaching a dangerous animal. He placed his fingers on Caleb's wrist, counting silently. His expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to something approaching fear. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "I checked him myself, no pulse, no breath, he was dead." "Well, he ain't dead now," Harlan said, his voice high and strained. "What do we do?" Doc Brennan pulled out his stethoscope and listened to Caleb's chest. The heartbeat was there, slow but steady, growing stronger with each passing minute. The doctor straightened, his face pale. "We need to get Marshal Pike, right now." By the time Marshal Pike arrived with Deputy Morris in tow, Caleb's breathing had become visible even to the untrained eye. His chest rose and fell with increasing regularity. The deathly pallor was beginning to fade from his face, replaced by a more natural color. Pike stared at the body, the man, on the table, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on the grip of his pistol. "How is this possible?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Doc Brennan admitted. "I've read about cases of catalepsy, where the body enters a death-like state, but I examined him. There was no pulse, no breath. The man was dead by every measure I know." "Maybe the rope didn't break his neck proper," Deputy Morris suggested. "Maybe he just passed out from lack of air, and we took him down before he actually died." "A man can't survive 10 minutes without air," Doc Brennan said sharply. "The brain dies. Even if the heart somehow kept beating, he'd be a vegetable. But look at him. His color's coming back. His breathing is normalizing. This is—" He stopped, unable to find words for what this was. As they watched, Caleb's eyelids began to flutter. "Step back," Pike ordered, drawing his pistol. The others obeyed without question. Caleb's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening. He stared up at the ceiling for a long moment, his expression blank. Then, with obvious effort, he turned his head to look at the men surrounding him. When he spoke, his voice was a raw whisper, his throat damaged from the rope. "Am I in hell?" "You should be dead," Marshal Pike said bluntly. Caleb's hand moved to his throat, fingers gently probing the angry red rope burn that circled his neck like a collar. He tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. His muscles trembled with the effort. "Easy," Doc Brennan said, his medical instincts overriding his fear. He moved forward to support Caleb's shoulders. "Your body's been through severe trauma. You need to move slowly." "What happened?" Caleb's voice was getting stronger, though it still sounded like gravel dragged across broken glass. "We hanged you," Pike said. 3 hours ago, you died. Doc Brennan pronounced you dead. We brought you here to be buried, and now you're breathing again." Caleb closed his eyes, processing this information. When he opened them again, there was something different in his gaze, a hollowness that hadn't been there before. "I remember. he said slowly. The rope, the falling, then nothing, just darkness, cold. And then I was, what? Doc Brennan leaned closer. What did you experience? Caleb shook his head. Nothing. There was nothing. No light, no voices, no... He stopped, his face twisting with an emotion that might have been despair or terror, or both. Just nothing. Silence filled the room. Outside, the sounds of evening in Redstone Ridge continued. Horses clopping down the street, someone calling for their child to come in for supper, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Normal life, while inside this room, 4 men grappled with something that defied every natural law they understood. What do we do with him? Deputy Morris finally asked. He was sentenced to hang until dead. We hanged him. He died. The law's been satisfied, hasn't it? The law says he's dead, Pike said slowly. We got a death certificate signed by Doc Brennan. We got a grave dug and paid for. We got about 300 witnesses who saw him hang. He looked at Caleb with an expression that mixed pity and fear. By law, Caleb Vance is dead. We can't try a dead man. We can't execute a dead man. So what? Harlan asked. We just let him go? We can't let him go, Morris protested. He's a murderer. He was a murderer, Pike corrected. The man who killed Sam Drummond is legally dead. Whatever he is now. He trailed off, having no words for what Caleb was now. Caleb had managed to sit up fully, though he moved like a man 3 times his age, every motion careful and painful. He looked down at his hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. I can't stay here, he said quietly. You know that. Whether the law says I'm dead or not, there are people in this town who'll want to finish what the rope started, and others who'll treat me like some kind of demon or miracle. I can't stay. Pike knew he was right. Word of this would spread like wildfire. By tomorrow, everyone in Redstone Ridge would know that Caleb Vance had returned from the dead. Some would fear him. Others would want to test whether he could die again. A few might even worship him as some kind of prophet or saint. None of those outcomes were acceptable. Where will you go? Doc Brennan asked. Far from here, Caleb said. Somewhere nobody knows my face or my name. Somewhere I can be somebody else. He stood slowly, testing his legs. They held, though he had to grip the edge of the table for support. The rope burn around his neck was already darkening to purple and black, a permanent reminder of the day he'd died. You'll need supplies, Pike said after a long moment. Food, water, a horse. I'll have them ready by dawn. You ride out before the town wakes up and you don't ever come back. That's the deal. And what will you tell people? Caleb asked. Pike met his eyes steadily. I'll tell them the truth. That you died on the gallows and we buried you proper. If anyone asks questions, I'll show them the death certificate and the grave marker. Let them think what they want to think. They'll think I'm a ghost, Caleb said, something that might have been bitter amusement in his voice. Maybe that's what you are now, Pike replied. A ghost. A man without a past, without a name, without a place in the world of the living. He paused. Might be that's worse than dying, but it's what you got. Caleb nodded slowly. He understood. The man he'd been was dead and buried, at least in the eyes of the law and the world. Whatever life he had now would be lived in the spaces between, in the forgotten corners where official records didn't reach and questions weren't asked. They kept him in the undertaking parlor that night, hidden from view. Harlan brought him food, hard bread, dried beef, water that tasted of metal from the well. Caleb ate mechanically, his body remembering how to sustain itself even as his mind struggled with the impossible reality of his situation. Doc Brennan stayed as well, unable to leave despite the late hour. He kept checking Caleb's vital signs, documenting everything with the precise care of a scientist encountering something unprecedented. Pulse rate, breathing pattern, reflexes. All normal. All perfectly, impossibly normal for a man who'd been dead hours earlier. Does it hurt? The doctor asked as midnight approached. Caleb touched his throat again. Yes, but not as much as it should. He looked at Brennan with those pale, unsettling eyes. I should be dead, shouldn't I? By all rights, by all reason, I should be dead. Yes, Brennan admitted. You should be. Then maybe I am, Caleb said softly. Maybe this is hell after all. Maybe I'm damned to walk around in this body, among the living, but never really alive again. Never really human again. That's superstitious nonsense, Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Caleb leaned back against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. You got a better explanation for what happened to me? Brennan had no answer. Marshal Pike arrived before dawn, as promised. He brought a horse, not Caleb's own mount, which had been sold to settle the costs of the trial, but a decent mare with good legs and a calm temperament. The saddlebags contained 3 days' worth of supplies, a canteen of water, a bedroll, and a small leather pouch with $20 in silver. It's not much, Pike said as Caleb checked the provisions, but it'll get you started. It's more than I deserve, Caleb replied. Maybe. Pike pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it over. This is your death certificate. Keep it. If anyone ever questions who you are, if anyone recognizes you, this is your proof that Caleb Vance is dead and buried in Redstone Ridge. You're somebody else now. Anybody else. Caleb took the document and carefully folded it into his shirt pocket right over his heart. Thank you, Marshal. Don't thank me, Pike said harshly. I'm not doing this out of kindness. I'm doing it because I don't know what the hell else to do with a man who came back from the dead. This is easier than trying to explain you to the territorial governor. He paused, his expression softening slightly. But for what it's worth, I hope you make something better of this second chance than you did of the first one. Caleb swung up into the saddle with more strength than he'd had the night before. His body was healing fast, unnaturally fast, though the rope burn on his neck remained vivid and raw. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading into the deep blue that preceded dawn. The town was still quiet, most citizens sleeping off the previous day's excitement. In a few hours, they'd wake and go about their business, secure in the knowledge that justice had been served and the killer was in his grave. They'd never know that the grave was empty. Caleb looked down at Pike one last time. If you ever hear of me again, he said quietly, I hope it's because I did something worth remembering for the right reasons. Just stay dead, Vance, Pike replied. That's all I ask. Caleb touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then turned the mare south toward open territory. He rode slowly at first, his body still remembering the trauma of the rope, then gradually faster as strength returned to his limbs, and the town of Redstone Ridge fell away behind him. He rode through the dawn, through the morning, through the heat of midday. He rode until the town was nothing but a memory, until there was nothing around him but empty land and endless sky. And as he rode, Caleb Vance, the man who died and somehow didn't, tried to figure out who he was supposed to be now that the person he'd been was officially dead and buried. The sun was high when he finally stopped to rest the horse and take water. His hand shook slightly as he uncapped the canteen, either from exhaustion or from the enormity of what had happened. He drank deep, the water cool and clean, tasting like life itself. When he lowered the canteen, he caught sight of his reflection in the water's surface. The same face looked back at him, hard features, pale eyes, the dark stubble on his jaw. But there was something different now, something in his expression that hadn't been there before the rope. He looked like a man who'd seen the other side and found it wanting. He looked like a ghost. And maybe that's exactly what he was, a ghost walking among the living, searching for some kind of redemption or purpose or meaning in a second life he never asked for and didn't understand. The mare shifted beneath him, eager to keep moving. Caleb let her have her head, following whatever direction she chose. It didn't matter where he went. Anywhere was better than nowhere, and nowhere was all he had left of the man he used to be. As the afternoon shadows lengthened and the frontier stretched endlessly before him, Caleb made himself a promise. If he was going to be dead to the world, if he was going to be a ghost, then he'd be a ghost with purpose. No more killing for pride or reputation. No more drawing on men just because they looked at him wrong. No more wasting this impossible second chance on the same mistakes that had put the rope around his neck in the first place. He didn't know what that purpose would be yet, but he'd find it. He had to. Because the alternative, wandering forever as a dead man among the living, without meaning or direction or hope, was a hell worse than any punishment the frontier could devise. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere ahead, beyond the next ridge or the ridge after that, there would be another town, another chance, Another opportunity to be someone other than the killer he'd been. Caleb Vance rode toward it, leaving his death and his name behind in the dust. 3 weeks of hard riding brought him to the edge of Colorado territory, where the land turned harsh and unforgiving. The summer heat had baked the earth into something resembling fired clay, cracked and hostile to anything trying to grow. What little grass remained stood yellow and brittle, snapping under the mare's hooves. Water became scarce enough that Caleb learned to ration what he carried, taking small sips that barely wet his throat while the sun hammered down from a sky bleached white with heat. He'd taken a new name in the first town he passed through, Cole Brennan, borrowing the doctor's surname without permission or apology. It felt strange on his tongue at first, like wearing boots that didn't quite fit, but necessity made it familiar fast. Nobody questioned a drifter looking for work. The frontier had thousands of men moving from place to place, running from something or searching for something, and most folks had the good sense not to ask which. The silver in Marshall Pike's pouch ran out after 2 weeks. Caleb, Cole now, he had to remember that, found work where he could. 3 days mucking stables in a town called Bitter Creek. A week helping a rancher repair fences outside a settlement so small it didn't even have a name. Just a general store and a church. The work was hard and the pay was poor, but it kept him moving and kept him fed. The rope burn on his neck faded from purple-black to angry red to pink scar tissue that would never fully disappear. People noticed it sometimes, their eyes lingering on that collar of damaged skin, but nobody asked. A man with a scar like that either survived a hanging or a bad accident with wire or rope, and either way, the story behind it wasn't the kind you requested over drinks. He avoided saloons when he could, avoided anywhere men gathered to drink and test each other with words that led to violence. The old Caleb would have walked into those places with his hand near his gun, daring anyone to look at him wrong. Cole kept his head down and his hands to himself. It wasn't cowardice, at least that's what he told himself. It was survival. The man he'd been was dead. The man he was trying to become couldn't afford the luxury of pride. But the nights were hard. In the darkness, alone with his bedroll under stars that seemed indifferent to human suffering, the memories came back. Sam Drummond's face in the split second before Caleb's bullet took him between the eyes. The other men before Sam, some whose names he remembered, others who'd become faceless ghosts in his conscience. The sound the rope made when it snapped tight, the terrible darkness that followed, that absolute nothing that might have been death or might have been something worse. He'd wake sometimes with his hand at his throat, feeling for the rope that was no longer there, his heart racing like he was back on that gallows, waiting for the drop. It was during one of these restless nights, camped beside a dried creek bed somewhere in the empty country between towns, that he heard the gunshots. 3 sharp cracks echoing across the darkness, followed by shouting. Men's voices, rough and celebratory. Then a woman's scream, abruptly cut off. Cole was on his feet before conscious thought caught up with instinct. His hand moved to where his gun should have been, but Marshall Pike hadn't given him a weapon when he'd sent him away from Redstone Ridge. A man returning from the dead didn't need the tools of killing, Pike had figured. Or maybe he'd figured that Caleb Vance had earned enough death and didn't deserve the means to deal more. Either way, Cole was unarmed except for the knife he used for cutting rope and preparing food. The sounds came from beyond a low ridge about a quarter-mile east. Cole moved toward them quietly, using the darkness and the scattered rocks for cover. The mare, ground-tied near his camp, watched him go with dark, knowing eyes. As he crested the ridge, he saw them in the hollow below. A wagon sat tilted at an angle, one wheel broken clean off. Supplies were scattered across the ground, sacks of flour, tins of food, clothing. 2 men ransacked the wagon's contents, while a third held a woman by the arm. Even in the moonlight, Cole could see she was fighting, twisting against the grip, her free hand clawing at the man's face. "Hold still, you wildcat," the man snarled, backhanding her hard enough that she stumbled. "We ain't gonna hurt you if you cooperate." "You're lying," she spat back, blood running from her split lip. "I know what men like you do." A 4th man emerged from behind the wagon, dragging a boy who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. The child was crying, struggling weakly against hands too strong to escape. "Found the whelp hiding in the back," the man called out. "What do we do with him?" "Same as we're gonna do with his ma," the first man said, and the ugly laughter that followed told Cole everything he needed to know about their intentions. He should have walked away. The smart play was to return to his camp, pack up, and ride in the opposite direction before these men knew he'd been there. He was one man with a knife against four armed men with no conscience and nothing to lose. Getting involved would be suicide, and he'd already died once. That should have been enough for any lifetime. But the boy's crying cut through the night air like a blade through flesh, and Cole found his feet carrying him down the ridge before his mind finished calculating the odds. He moved quietly, using the terrain and the darkness. The men were focused on their victims and their plunder, confident in their numbers and their isolation. Nobody expected trouble out here in the middle of nowhere. Cole reached the nearest man, the one holding the woman, and struck fast and hard. His knife found the space between ribs, angling up toward the heart. The man made a wet, gasping sound and collapsed. Cole caught the woman before she could fall with him, one hand over her mouth before she could scream and alert the others. "I'm here to help," he whispered urgently. "Where are their guns?" Her eyes were wide with shock and terror, but she managed to gesture toward the wagon. Cole could see gun belts draped over the seat, too far away to reach without being seen. "Can you run?" he asked. She nodded. "Then take your boy and run. Don't stop, don't look back. When you reach help, tell them what happened here." "But you—" "I'll be fine. Go, now." He released her and she ran toward her son, grabbing the boy from the distracted outlaw who'd been too busy stuffing his pockets with whatever valuables he could find. The man's head came up at the movement, confusion crossing his face. "Hey, where do you think you're—" Cole threw the knife. It wasn't a weapon designed for throwing, the balance all wrong, but at 15 feet the blade found meat. The outlaw screamed, clutching at the handle protruding from his shoulder. The other two men spun around, reaching for their weapons. Cole was already moving, diving behind the wagon, as bullets tore through the night air where he'd been standing. He heard the woman and her child crashing through the brush, their footsteps fading into the darkness. "Who the hell are you?" one of the men shouted. Cole didn't answer. He grabbed one of the gun belts from the wagon seat, pulling the revolver free. It was a Colt, .45, well-maintained, the weight of it familiar and terrible in his hand. He'd sworn not to kill again. He'd promised himself that the man who died on that gallows would stay dead, buried with all his violence and all his sins. But sometimes promises broke as easy as wagon wheels. The first man came around the wagon too fast, too confident. Cole shot him in the chest, the report of the Colt deafening in the quiet night. The man went down without a sound. "Damn it!" The remaining unwounded outlaw fired blindly toward the wagon, bullets punching through wood and canvas. One passed so close to Cole's head he felt the air displacement. "You just killed yourself, stranger!" Cole moved again, circling wide. The man with the knife still in his shoulder had managed to pull it free and was trying to staunch the bleeding with one hand while aiming a pistol with the other. His aim was wild, compromised by pain and shock. "Drop your weapons," Cole called out. "You can ride away from this. Nobody else has to die." "The hell we will." The unwounded man fired twice more in the direction of Cole's voice. "You just killed Billy. You think we're going to let that stand?" Cole sighed. He'd tried. That was more mercy than these men would have shown the woman and her child. He stepped out from behind a rock and fired twice. Both shots found their marks. The unwounded man dropped with a bullet through his throat. The wounded one fell backward, the hole in his chest already spreading red across his shirt. Silence rushed back in to fill the space where gunfire had been. Cole stood among the bodies, the smoking Colt heavy in his hand, and felt something inside him break that he'd been trying desperately to keep whole. He'd lasted 3 weeks, 21 days of being someone other than a killer. And now here he was again, standing over dead men with their blood on his hands. It was them or the woman and her boy, he said aloud to the indifferent darkness. There wasn't another choice. But the darkness didn't answer, and the dead men couldn't argue with his justification. Cole spent the next hour cleaning up the aftermath. He dragged the bodies away from the wagon and covered them with rocks from the dried creek bed. Not a proper burial, but enough to keep the scavengers away for a while. He gathered the scattered supplies and loaded them back into the wagon as best he could with one wheel broken. He found the horses the outlaws had been riding, 4 decent animals ground-tied 50 yards away, and tied them to the wagon's tailgate. Dawn was breaking by the time he finished. The sky turned from black to gray to pale yellow, and with the light came the realization of what he'd done and what it meant. He couldn't go back to drifting. Word would spread about the killings, and someone would eventually connect a drifter named Cole Brennan to the bodies in the desert. He needed to get farther away, deeper into territory where questions weren't asked and strangers were common as dust. He was saddling his mare when he heard voices approaching. He reached for the Colt, still tucked in the gun belt he'd claimed, then stopped himself when he recognized the woman's voice calling out hesitantly. "Hello? Are you still here?" Cole stepped into view. The woman and her boy emerged from behind the ridge where they'd hidden through the night, accompanied now by 3 men on horseback. The men wore the weathered look of ranchers or miners, working folks who'd responded to the woman's call for help. "That's him," the woman said, pointing at Cole. "He saved us." The men regarded Cole with the cautious respect frontier people reserved for dangerous things that happened to be useful. Their eyes took in the gun belt, the bodies covered with rocks, the blood still dark on the ground. "Name's Tom Whitlock," the oldest of the 3 said, urging his horse forward a few steps. He was in his 50s, with sun-damaged skin and hands calloused from decades of hard labor. "This is my sister Eleanor, and my nephew Samuel." He gestured to the woman and boy. "Eleanor says 4 men attacked them last night, says you killed all 4. "They didn't give me much choice," Cole said evenly. "I imagine not." Whitlock's eyes moved to the rope burn on Cole's neck, lingering there for a moment before returning to meet Cole's gaze. "You got a name?" "Cole Brennan." "Where you headed, Mr. Brennan?" Cole almost laughed. He'd been asking himself that same question for 3 weeks. "Nowhere in particular, just riding." "You looking for work?" The question caught Cole off guard. "What kind of work?" "I run a silver mine about 15 miles northeast of here. Small operation, just me and a few workers, but the vein's still producing. Thing is, we've been having trouble lately. Men coming around, making threats, trying to force me to sell. They burned down one of our shacks last month, killed 2 of my mules, scared off most of my workers." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I could use a man who knows how to handle himself when trouble comes calling." "I'm not a killer for hire," Cole said flatly. "I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to help protect what's mine. There's a difference." Whitlock gestured to Eleanor and the boy. "My sister's husband died in a mining accident 6 months back. She and Samuel are all the family I got left. Those men last night, the ones you killed? They were working for Victor Calder, the man who wants my mine. You killed 4 of his men, which means you're already in this whether you want to be or not. Calder doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget." Cole looked at Eleanor. She met his eyes steadily. This woman who'd fought like a wildcat against men who would have destroyed her, who'd run through the darkness clutching her child to her chest. "Your brother's right," she said quietly. "Calder will come after you now. At least at the mine, you won't be alone when he does." It was a trap, Cole knew. Once he accepted, once he let himself become part of their lives and their struggle, he wouldn't be able to just walk away. He'd be committed. He'd be responsible for more than just himself. But he'd already killed 4 men to save this woman and her child. Maybe that meant he was already committed, whether he acknowledged it or not. "How much does it pay?" he asked. "Room, board, and $30 a month," Whitlock said, "plus a share of the silver if we manage to keep the mine running." It wasn't much, but it was something, and something was more than he'd had when he woke up this morning. "All right," Cole said, "I'll work for you. But I need to be clear about one thing. I'll help you protect your mine, but I'm not starting a war. If there's a way to settle this without more killing, that's the way we take." Whitlock nodded. "Fair enough. Though I should warn you, Victor Calder isn't much for peaceful settlements." They spent the rest of the morning repairing Eleanor's wagon well enough to limp back to the mine. One of Whitlock's companions, a lean Mexican man named Raphael, proved skilled with wood and metalwork. He fashioned a temporary wheel from boards scavenged from the wagon bed and secured it with rope and strips of leather. "It won't hold forever," Raphael said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But it'll get us home." The journey to the mine took most of the day. They traveled slowly, limited by the damaged wagon and the rough terrain. The land grew increasingly desolate as they went, the already sparse vegetation giving way to rocky outcroppings and stretches of bare earth where nothing grew at all. "Not much to look at, is it?" Eleanor said, riding beside Cole on a horse one of the men had brought for her. Samuel sat in front of her, his small hands gripping the saddle horn, his eyes still carrying the haunted look of a child who'd seen too much violence too young. "I've seen worse," Cole said, which was true. The Dakota Badlands made this place look hospitable by comparison. My husband always said there was silver here worth finding, Eleanor continued. He spent 2 years digging before he found the main vein, worked himself half to death proving everyone wrong who said this land was worthless. Her voice caught slightly. Then the tunnel collapsed and took him with it. I'm sorry. Don't be. James died doing what he loved, working ground that was his. That's more than most men get. She looked at Cole with eyes that had learned to see past surfaces. That mark on your neck. You don't have to tell me the story if you don't want to, but I figure a man who survives a hanging either got lucky or got help from someone who believed he didn't deserve to die. Cole's hand moved unconsciously to his throat. Bit of both, maybe. Were you guilty? The question was direct, unafraid. Cole appreciated that. Yeah, he said. I killed a man. Drew faster, shot straighter. He died. I didn't. By the law's reckoning, that made me a murderer. And by your reckoning? I don't know anymore, Cole admitted. I used to think I was just surviving in a world where you kill or get killed, but survival's a poor excuse for taking lives. He paused, watching the horizon where heat shimmer made the air dance. I'm trying to be different now, trying to be better than what I was. That's all any of us can do, Eleanor said. She shifted Samuel's weight in her arms. Try to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. The mine came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. It wasn't much to look at. A cluster of rough wooden buildings huddled against the base of a rocky hillside, with the dark mouth of the mine shaft visible above them like a wound in the earth. A small creek, barely more than a trickle at this time of year, ran past the settlement. A few scraggly cottonwood trees marked its course, their leaves gray with dust. Home, Whitlock announced with a touch of irony. Such as it is. 2 men emerged from one of the buildings as they approached. One was older, maybe 60, with a beard gone mostly white and skin weathered to the texture of old leather. The other was young, barely out of his teens, with nervous eyes that darted between the approaching riders. Tom, the older man called out. Thank the heavens. We heard shots last night. Thought maybe... He stopped as he noticed Eleanor and Samuel. You found them. Calder's men found them first, Whitlock said grimly, dismounting. 4 of them. They're dead now. He gestured to Cole. This is Cole Brennan. He killed the men who attacked Eleanor. He's going to work with us. The older man studied Cole with the same cautious appraisal the others had shown. Name's Henry Morse. I've been working this mine since before Tom bought it from the previous owner. That's Danny over there. He indicated the younger man. He's new, only been here a month. Pleased to meet you, Cole said, though pleased seemed like the wrong word for the circumstances. Danny just nodded, his eyes fixed on the colt at Cole's hip. They unloaded the wagon and tended to the horses while Whitlock explained what had happened. Eleanor added details where necessary, her voice steady despite the trauma of the previous night. Samuel stayed close to his mother, one small hand clutching her skirt. Calder's getting bolder, Henry said when the story was finished. 4 men ambushing travelers on the road. That's beyond trying to scare us into selling. That's attempted murder. Is there law around here? Cole asked. A marshal, a sheriff? Whitlock laughed bitterly. Nearest law is in Copper Springs, 40 miles south, and the marshal there is in Calder's pocket anyway. We report this, and Calder will have 10 witnesses swearing his men were somewhere else that night, and we must have killed 4 innocent cowboys for no reason. Then what stops him from just taking what he wants? Us, Henry said simply. We stop him. As long as we're here, working the mine, producing silver, we own this land legal and proper. The moment we leave or sell or get killed, Calder moves in and claims it all. Cole felt the weight of that reality settling over him. This wasn't just about protecting a mine, it was about standing between ruthless ambition and the last thing this family had left in the world. They ate dinner as the last light faded from the sky. Salt pork, beans, and coffee, strong enough to strip paint. Eleanor cooked over an open fire, refusing Raphael's offer to help with the kind of stubborn independence that Cole was beginning to recognize as a family trait. Samuel sat close to the fire, quiet, except for an occasional nightmare memory tremor that ran through his small frame. Tell me about Calder, Cole said as they ate. Who is he? What does he want? Victor Calder owns half the territory, Whitlock said. Mines, smelting operations, railroads, timber. Started small 30 years ago with a single claim up north. Built an empire through shrewd dealing and, when that didn't work, through intimidation and violence. He wants this mine because it's the last piece of the valley he doesn't control. He offered to buy me out 3 times. The first offer was fair, the second was insulting. The third was a threat dressed up as a business proposal. How many men does he have? Dozens, maybe more. He's got legitimate workers at his operations, but he also keeps hired guns on the payroll. Men who handle the dirty work when negotiation fails. Like the 4 who attacked Eleanor. Exactly like them. Cole poured himself more coffee, thinking. Has he made direct threats? Anything you could take to territorial authorities, even if the local marshal won't help. Nothing we can prove, Eleanor said. She'd finally sat down to eat, Samuel curled against her side. Accidents happen at mines all the time. Equipment breaks, tunnels collapse. When James died, Calder sent his condolences and another offer to buy. Very generous of him. The words dripped with contempt. You think he caused the collapse? I can't prove it, Eleanor said. But James inspected those support timbers the morning he died. He was meticulous about safety. For all of them to fail at once? She shook her head. It doesn't sit right. They sat in silence for a while, the crackle of the fire the only sound besides the distant call of a nightbird hunting in the darkness. What's the mine worth? Cole finally asked. Why does Calder want it so badly? The silver vein James found runs deep, Whitlock said. Could produce for years if we had the capital to properly develop it. But we're too small. We can pull enough ore to keep operating, pay our workers, put food on the table, but we can't compete with Calder's industrial operations. He wants to buy us cheap, then bring in his equipment and his methods and extract every ounce of silver in a fraction of the time. And you don't want to sell. This mine killed my husband, Eleanor said quietly. But it was also his dream. His proof that all the people who laughed at him were wrong. I won't hand that over to Victor Calder for any price. She looked at Cole. Does that make me foolish? No, Cole said. It makes you loyal. There's nothing foolish about that. Henry cleared his throat. We should show him the mine tomorrow. Let him see what we're protecting. Whitlock nodded. Good idea. For tonight, Cole can bunk in the spare cabin. It's not much, but the roof doesn't leak and there's a stove for when the nights turn cold. They showed him to a small structure set slightly apart from the others. It had one room with a narrow bed, a table, a chair, and the promised stove. A lantern hung from a hook on the wall. Someone had swept the floor recently, though dust was already creeping back through the gaps in the boards. It was James's place, Eleanor said from the doorway. Before the accident, I cleaned it out after, but nobody's lived here since. She paused. If that bothers you, it doesn't, Cole said. I've slept in worse places. I'm sure you have. She studied him for a moment, this woman who'd fought 4 armed men with nothing but her will to survive. Thank you again for last night. Samuel and I would be... She stopped, unable or unwilling to finish that sentence. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You had no reason to help us. You could have ridden past and saved yourself the trouble. But you didn't. She touched the rope burn on his neck briefly, her fingers gentle. Whatever you were before, Mr. Brennan, you're not that man anymore. I can see it. She left before he could respond, returning to the main cabin where Samuel waited. Cole stood in the doorway of his new home, watching her go, wondering if she was right, wondering if a man could truly change just by deciding to, or if the violence would always be there, waiting under the surface for an excuse to emerge. He went inside and lay down on the narrow bed without bothering to undress. The Colt sat on the table within easy reach, just in case Calder's men decided to pay a visit during the night. Sleep came slowly, and when it finally arrived, it brought dreams of rope and darkness, and the 4 men whose lives he'd taken to save 2 others. In the morning, he'd see the mine. He'd learn the layout, the routines, the vulnerabilities. He'd figure out how to protect these people who'd given him shelter and purpose when he'd had neither. But tonight, in the darkness of a dead man's cabin, Cole Brennan, the ghost who used to be Caleb Vance, simply existed in the space between who he'd been and who he was trying to become, and tried not to think about how thin that space really was. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon drifting through the thin cabin walls. Cole woke to unfamiliar sounds, the clang of metal on metal, men's voices calling to each other, the creak of a pulley system somewhere up the hillside. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was, his hand reaching instinctively for the Colt before memory caught up with consciousness. He dressed in the same clothes he'd worn for weeks, wishing he had something clean to put on. The shirt was stiff with dried sweat and dust, the trousers worn thin at the knees. He'd need to remedy that soon if he was staying. A man couldn't work a mine in clothes that were falling apart. Outside, the settlement had come alive with morning activity. Henry stood near the mine entrance, organizing equipment while Danny loaded tools into a wheelbarrow. Raphael was working on the wagon again, reinforcing the temporary wheel with proper materials scavenged from somewhere. Eleanor emerged from the main cabin with Samuel, both of them looking better rested than Cole felt. "There's breakfast if you want it," she called out when she saw him. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." Tom Whitlock was already eating, standing beside the fire with a tin plate in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. He nodded to Cole in greeting. "Sleep all right?" "Well enough," Cole said, accepting the plate Eleanor handed him. Bacon, fried potatoes, and a thick slice of bread. Simple food, but after weeks of his own poor cooking, it tasted like something close to luxury. "We'll tour the mine after breakfast," Whitlock said. "Show you the layout, the operation, what we're defending." He paused, chewing thoughtfully. "Fair warning, it's not much to look at. We're barely scraping by with the equipment we've got." "I don't need it to be pretty," Cole said. "I just need to understand it." They finished eating as the sun climbed higher, burning off the slight coolness that passed for morning in this country. Samuel helped his mother clean the breakfast dishes, moving with the careful responsibility of a child who'd learned too young that he needed to be useful. The boy hadn't spoken a word since they'd arrived at the mine. Eleanor said he'd been chatty before the attack, always asking questions, always exploring. Now he just watched everything with those haunted eyes and stayed silent. Henry joined them as they approached the mine entrance. The opening was reinforced with heavy timbers, dark wood that had been treated with something to resist rot and insects. A narrow-gauge rail track ran from the entrance down to a sorting area where ore would be separated from worthless rock. The whole operation was small-scale, built by men with more determination than capital. "James designed most of this himself," Whitlock said as they entered the tunnel. He'd lit a lantern, the flame dancing in the disturbed air. Studied mining engineering from books, taught himself the mathematics of it. Some of the old-timers laughed at him for that, said book learning couldn't replace experience. Then he found the vein and proved them all wrong. The tunnel sloped downward gradually, cool air rising to meet them as they descended. The walls showed tool marks where men had chipped away rock one swing at a time, searching for the silver that would justify all the effort. Support timbers appeared at regular intervals, holding back the weight of the earth above. "How deep does it go?" Cole asked. "About 300 feet at the deepest point," Henry answered. "The main vein runs along the eastern wall about halfway down. That's where we're pulling most of our ore from now." They walked in silence for a while. The only sounds their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from somewhere deeper in the darkness. Cole studied everything: the timber placement, the condition of the supports, the places where the rock looked unstable. If someone wanted to sabotage this operation, there were dozens of ways to do it. A few strategic cuts on support beams, explosives placed at key points, even something as simple as flooding the lower tunnels if you could divert water from the creek. "This is where James died," Eleanor said quietly. They'd reached a section where newer timbers replaced older ones, the wood still showing the pale color of recent installation. A junction branched off to the left, the tunnel there blocked with debris that hadn't been fully cleared. "The ceiling came down just after noon," Whitlock said. "James was inspecting the supports, same as he did every day. Raphael was with him, maybe 20 feet back. Raphael heard the first crack and ran. James tried to follow, but..." He stopped, the rest of the sentence unnecessary. "How long did it take to dig him out?" Cole asked. 3 days, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady, but Cole could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "We knew by the second day that we wouldn't find him alive. But I needed to bring him out, needed to bury him proper." Raphael had been silent since they entered the mine, but now he spoke, his accent giving his words a musical quality despite the grim subject. "The timbers that failed, senor, they were good wood. I helped James select them myself from the lumberyard in Copper Springs. No rot, no cracks, no weakness. James, he checked them the morning he died. Everything was sound. But they failed anyway, Cole said. See, all at once, like someone cut them at the same moment. Boss Raphael met Cole's eyes. I told the marshal this when he came to investigate. He said sometimes rock settles strange, puts pressure where you don't expect. But I have worked in mines since I was Samuel's age. Rock does not settle like that. You think someone sabotaged the supports, Cole said. I think someone wanted James dead, Raphael said bluntly. And I think we all know who had reason to want that. They continued deeper into the mine. Whitlock showed Cole where they were currently working, a section where the silver vein ran rich enough to see the metal glinting in the lantern light. It wasn't the massive deposit that would make a man wealthy overnight, but it was steady, reliable income if they could keep working it. We pull about 40 pounds of ore a week, Henry explained. Process it ourselves with the equipment we've got. Then sell the refined silver in Copper Springs. After expenses, we clear maybe $70, $80 a month. Split 5 ways now that you're here, that's not much per man. It's enough, Whitlock said firmly. It keeps the mine running, keeps us fed, proves we're serious about not selling. They emerged back into sunlight half an hour later. Cole's eyes needed a moment to adjust to the brightness. Eleanor was waiting near the entrance with water, anticipating their thirst. What do you think? She asked as Cole drank. I think whoever collapsed that tunnel knew exactly what they were doing, Cole said, and I think they'll try it again if we give them the chance. So what do we do? Cole handed back the empty cup. We make it harder for them. Post watches at night, inspect the supports daily, look for any signs of tampering, keep inventory of our supplies, make sure nothing's being stolen or sabotaged. And we need to be ready for more direct attacks, like what happened to you and Samuel. You're talking about turning this place into a fortress, Whitlock said. I'm talking about survival, Cole replied. Calder's already killed one of you. He tried to kill 2 more. He's not going to stop just because we ask him nicely. Danny had been listening from nearby, his young face troubled. What if we just sold? Took whatever Calder's offering and left? There's other places we could go, other ways to make a living. You want to run? You run, Whitlock said, his tone harder than Cole had heard it before. Nobody's forcing you to stay, but this mine is all I've got left of my brother-in-law, and I'll be damned if I hand it over to the man who killed him. Tom, Eleanor said softly, touching her brother's arm. Whitlock took a breath, visibly calming himself. I'm sorry, Danny. That was harsh. You've got every right to leave if you want. This isn't your fight. Danny looked at the ground, scuffing his boot in the dirt. I didn't say I wanted to leave. I just asked what if. He raised his eyes to meet Whitlock's. My pa always said a man stands by his word. I hired on here. I'll see it through. Good man, Henry said, clapping Danny on the shoulder. They spent the rest of the day fortifying what they could. Cole and Raphael built a simple barricade that could be pulled across the mine entrance at night, heavy enough to slow down intruders and noisy enough to wake everyone if someone tried to move it. Henry and Danny took inventory of their supplies, counting everything from blasting powder to food stores. Whitlock rode out to check the property boundaries, making sure Calder's men hadn't moved any of the survey markers that defined where the mine's land ended and the rest of the territory began. Eleanor worked with Samuel on his letters and numbers, trying to maintain some normalcy for the boy, despite everything that had happened. Cole could hear them from where he was working, Eleanor's patient voice and Samuel's silent concentration as he traced letters in the dirt with a stick. He hasn't spoken since that night, Eleanor said later when Samuel had gone to help Danny with some small task. She stood beside Cole, watching her son with worried eyes. The doctor in Copper Springs says sometimes trauma does that to children. Says he'll speak again when he's ready. He's lucky to have you, Cole said. I'm lucky to have him. He's all I've got left of James. She was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Those 4 men you killed, was that easy for you? Cole set down the hammer he'd been using. No, it's never easy, but it was necessary, and I'd do it again if the same situation came up. How many men have you killed? The question was direct, unflinching. Cole appreciated that she wasn't dancing around it. 17 that I know for certain, maybe more. I didn't always stick around to count bodies after a gunfight. Eleanor absorbed this without visible reaction. Do you regret it? Some of them. The ones who didn't really deserve it, who just happened to be in the wrong place or picked the wrong fight. Others? He shook his head. The world's better without them in it, and I can't find it in myself to feel sorry about that. And which category do those 4 men fall into? The second one, Cole said without hesitation. Men who'd ambush a woman and a child on a dark road aren't men worth mourning. Good, Eleanor said simply. She started to walk away, then turned back. For what it's worth, Mr. Brennan, I'm glad you're here. Samuel's alive because of you. I'm alive because of you. Whatever you did before, whatever brought you to that gallows, you've already started evening the scales. She left him then, returning to her cabin where Samuel was waiting. Cole stood alone in the fading afternoon light, thinking about scales and balance and whether a man could ever truly make up for the violence in his past. That night they instituted the watch system Cole had suggested. 2 men at a time, rotating every 4 hours. Cole took the first shift with Henry, both of them armed and alert as full darkness settled over the mine. You really think they'll come tonight? Henry asked as they walked the perimeter. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Calder knows we're not selling, which means he needs to escalate. Make things bad enough that we have no choice but to leave. We won't leave. I know. That's what makes this dangerous. They walked in silence for a while. The only sounds, the night insects, and the occasional call of a hunting owl. The stars were brilliant in the clear sky, countless and indifferent. Can I ask you something? Henry said eventually. Seems to be the question of the day. That mark on your neck. You really survive a hanging? Cole touched the scar reflexively. Yeah. How? I don't know. The rope was tight, the drop was clean. By all rights, I should have died. But I didn't. He paused. Or maybe I did, and this is what comes after. I haven't figured that part out yet. You believe in second chances? I'm living one, aren't I? Whether I believe in it or not doesn't change the fact that I'm here. Henry nodded thoughtfully. I had a brother once. Got himself killed in the war. He was always the good one, the one who did things right. I was the screw-up who couldn't hold a job or stay out of trouble. After he died, I figured the world got it backwards. Should have been me in that grave instead of him. He looked at Cole. Took me years to understand that thinking that way was just another form of giving up. We don't get to choose who lives and who dies. We only get to choose what we do with the time we're given. That's a more charitable way of looking at it than I've managed, Cole admitted. Give it time. You're still figuring out who you are now that you're not who you were. That takes a while. Their shift ended without incident. Cole woke Raphael and Danny for the next watch, then returned to his cabin for a few hours of sleep before dawn. He was tired enough that sleep came quickly despite his usual nightmares, and when he woke to the sound of someone pounding on his door, it took him a moment to orient himself. Cole, wake up! It was Whitlock's voice, urgent and afraid. Cole grabbed the Colt and yanked open the door. Whitlock stood there, his face pale in the pre-dawn darkness. It's the well, he said. Someone poisoned it. They gathered around the well in the growing light of morning. The water had been their primary source, fed by an underground spring that had never run dry even in the worst droughts. Now the surface of the water was covered with a thin, oily sheen, and the smell rising from it was chemical and wrong. Kerosene, Henry said, kneeling beside the well and sniffing carefully. Someone dumped kerosene down the well, probably several gallons from the smell of it. When? Cole asked. Had to be during the night, between watch rotations, Raphael said. His face was tight with anger. We checked the well at the start of each shift. It was clean at midnight when Danny and I took over. Now this. So they were here, Eleanor said quietly. Watching us, waiting for their chance. Cole studied the ground around the well, looking for tracks, but the earth had been trampled by everyone gathering to see the damage. If there had been useful evidence, it was gone now. How long until we can use the well again? Whitlock asked. Henry shook his head. We can't. Not safely. We'd have to drain it completely, scrub the walls, let it refill naturally from the spring. Even then, there might be contamination in the rock that keeps leaching into the water. Could take weeks, maybe months. We don't have months, Danny said. We need water now. There's the creek, Raphael pointed out. The creek's barely a trickle this time of year, Whitlock said. Might give us enough for drinking and cooking, but not enough to run the mine operations. We need water for processing the ore, cooling the equipment. Without it, we're dead in the water." He stopped, realizing what he'd said. Poor choice of words. Cole looked at the ruined well, then at the mine entrance, then at the small creek winding past the settlement. Someone had planned this carefully, understanding that water was the mine's lifeline. Cut off the water, and the operation couldn't continue. Eventually, they'd have no choice but to abandon the place. "There's another option," he said slowly. "What option?" Eleanor asked. "We bring the water to us, dig a channel from upstream, divert more of the creek flow to run past the settlement. It won't be as convenient as a well, but it'll keep us operating." "That's weeks of work," Henry protested. "Digging through rock, building sluices, making sure the grade is right so the water actually flows." "Then we better get started," Cole said. They worked through the heat of the day and into the evening, taking breaks only when absolutely necessary. Cole and Raphael handled most of the heavy digging, breaking through the hard pan with picks and moving the loosened earth with shovels. Danny and Henry constructed wooden sluices from boards salvaged from collapsed outbuildings. Whitlock marked the route the water would take, using surveying equipment his brother-in-law had left behind. Eleanor kept them supplied with food and what water they could safely take from the downstream portion of the creek. She'd boiled it first just to be safe, and though it tasted of minerals and silt, it was better than nothing. Samuel helped where he could, carrying small tools and clearing rocks from the path of the channel. The boy still hadn't spoken, but Cole noticed he stayed close to the men, watching their work with intense focus, as if memorizing every detail. By the second day, they'd made real progress. The channel was taking shape, a narrow ditch that would carry water from a point upstream where the flow was stronger down to the settlement. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. That's when the riders came. Cole saw them first, 8 men on horseback approaching from the south. They rode in loose formation, casual but alert, the kind of men who were comfortable with violence and didn't bother hiding it. He recognized the type immediately, hired guns wearing the veneer of respectability that money could buy. "Company," he called out, straightening from his work. The others stopped what they were doing, moving instinctively closer together. Raphael picked up his rifle. Henry did the same. Danny looked scared but determined, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the settlement. The man in front was well-dressed compared to the others, wearing a suit that probably cost more than the mine produced in a month. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked friendly until you noticed the coldness in his eyes. "Tom Whitlock," the man called out in a voice that carried authority. "We need to talk." "That's Victor Calder," Whitlock said quietly to Cole. "The man himself." Cole studied Calder, memorizing details. The way he sat his horse, with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no and meant it. The expensive gun at his hip that probably had never been fired except at a range. The 7 men with him who looked like they'd been fired at plenty and returned the favor. "You're trespassing, Calder," Whitlock shouted back. "This is private property." "I'm aware," Calder said smoothly. "I'm also aware you've had some troubles lately. Contaminated well, I heard. That's a real shame. Makes it hard to run a mining operation without clean water." "You'd know all about that, wouldn't you?" Eleanor stepped forward, her voice sharp with accusation. "Seeing as how your men are the ones who poisoned it." Calder's expression didn't change. "Careful about making accusations you can't prove, Mrs. Whitlock. That kind of talk could be considered slander." His gaze swept over the group, stopping when it reached Cole. "I don't believe we've met. You're new here." "Just passing through," Cole said. "Interesting timing. You arrive right after 4 of my men go missing in the territory. Their bodies turned up yesterday, shot and killed. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Your men attacked a woman and a child on a dark road," Cole said flatly. "I stopped them. That's all there is to it." "Is that your version of events?" Calder smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The law might see it differently. Murder's still murder, even out here in the territory." "The law didn't see fit to protect Eleanor and her son," Cole replied. "So I did what was necessary." "Necessity is a matter of perspective, mister. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "I didn't give it." They stared at each other across the distance, 2 men taking measure of what they were facing. Calder was the first to look away, turning his attention back to Whitlock. "I'm here to make you an offer, Tom. One last offer before things get considerably worse for you. I'll pay you $15,000 for this mine and all the land associated with it. That's more than fair for an operation that barely breaks even." "My answer's the same as it's been every other time," Whitlock said. "No. You're being unreasonable. This mine is worthless without water. You can dig all the channels you want, but come summer drought, that creek will dry up completely. Then what will you do?" "We'll figure it out." "Will you?" Calder's voice hardened. "Think about your sister, Tom. Think about that boy of hers. This is no life for them, scratching in the dirt for silver that barely pays your expenses. I'm offering you a way out, a fresh start somewhere else." "A fresh start bought with my husband's blood," Eleanor said. "I'll die before I take that deal." "That can be arranged," one of Calder's men muttered. The tension ratcheted up immediately. Raphael raised his rifle. Henry did the same. Cole's hand moved to the Colt at his hip. "Easy," Calder said, holding up a hand. "Nobody needs to do anything stupid." He looked at Cole specifically. "You've already killed 4 men. Are you prepared to kill 8 more? Because that's what it would take to walk away from this conversation." "If I have to," Cole said, and meant it. Calder studied him for a long moment. "You're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which yet." He gathered his reins, preparing to leave. "This is your last chance, Tom. Take the money and walk away. Because if you don't, I promise you'll regret it, and your sister and her boy will regret it even more." "Is that a threat?" Whitlock demanded. "It's a prediction," Calder said. "Accidents happen in mining country all the time. Cave-ins, explosions, equipment failures. It would be tragic if something happened to that poor widow and her fatherless child while you were too stubborn to see reason." Cole drew the Colt in one smooth motion, the barrel leveling on Calder before any of the hired guns could react. "Get off this property," he said quietly. "And if anything happens to Eleanor or Samuel, if they so much as stub a toe in a way that looks suspicious, I'll come for you personally. That's not a threat. That's a promise." Calder's men reached for their weapons, but Calder stopped them with a gesture. Bold words from a man who's already supposed to be dead. He smiled at Cole's reaction. "Oh yes, I know who you are. Caleb Vance, the gunfighter who survived hanging in Redstone Ridge. News like that travels, even out here. There are some very interesting questions about how you managed that trick." Cole kept the Colt steady. "Leave. Now." "We're going," Calder said. "But this isn't over, Mr. Vance. Not by a long shot." He turned his horse, his men following suit. As they rode away, he called back over his shoulder, "You've got 1 week to reconsider my offer. After that, I stop being generous." They watched the riders disappear into the distance, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Nobody spoke until they were completely out of sight. "He knows who you are?" Whitlock said finally. "Yeah," Cole replied, holstering the Colt. "Does that change anything?" Cole thought about it. About the death certificate in his pocket that said Caleb Vance was dead and buried. About the promise he'd made to himself to be someone different, someone better. About the fact that Victor Calder now knew exactly who was standing between him and what he wanted. "No," he said. "It doesn't change anything. I'm still here. We're still not selling. And if Calder wants this mine, he's going to have to go through me to get it." Eleanor touched his arm gently. "Thank you for standing up to him, for protecting us." "Don't thank me yet," Cole said, watching the dust settle where Calder's men had ridden. "That was just the opening move. The real trouble's still coming." And he was right. The trouble came 3 nights later, just after midnight when the watch was changing. Cole had been asleep for maybe 2 hours when the explosion tore through the darkness like thunder ripping the world apart. He was out of bed with the Colt in his hand before he was fully awake, muscle memory from too many years of sleeping light taking over. Through the cabin window he could see flames rising from somewhere near the mine entrance, orange and hungry against the black sky. He ran barefoot across the compound, ignoring the rocks cutting into his feet. The others were emerging from their cabins, Raphael already armed and moving toward the fire, Henry close behind with buckets in both hands. Eleanor stood in her doorway with Samuel pressed against her side, the boy's eyes wide and reflecting the flames. "Stay inside," Cole shouted to her as he passed. "Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me or your brother." The storage shed near the mine entrance was fully engulfed, flames pouring from the windows and through gaps in the roof boards. Inside that shed, they'd kept the blasting powder, the fuses, half their mining equipment. If the fire reached the powder, the explosion would level half the settlement. "Water!" Whitlock was yelling, already working the pump they'd installed on the new channel. "We need to contain this before it spreads." Danny appeared with more buckets, his young face streaked with soot and fear. Raphael had grabbed a shovel and was throwing dirt on the flames nearest the mine entrance, trying to create a fire break. The heat was intense, pushing them back even as they fought to get closer. Cole grabbed a bucket from Danny and threw water on the base of the fire, the liquid hissing as it hit burning wood. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a thimble. For every bucket they threw, the flames seemed to grow stronger. "The powder!" Henry shouted. "We have to get the powder out!" "It's too late," Raphael called back. "The whole shed's burning." But Whitlock was already moving toward the door, his shirt pulled up over his mouth and nose. Cole dropped his bucket and grabbed the man's arm, yanking him back. "You'll die in there," Cole said. "We'll all die if that powder goes up," Whitlock shot back, trying to pull free. Cole held firm. "Then we get everyone clear, right now. The mine? Forget the mine. Get your sister and Samuel away from here. Get everyone to safety. Move." For a second, Whitlock looked like he might argue, might try to push past and play hero. Then the reality of the situation settled over him, and he nodded, running toward the cabins where Eleanor waited. "Everyone fall back," Cole shouted. "Get to the creek bed. Use it for cover." They ran, abandoning the buckets and shovels, sprinting away from the inferno that had been their storage shed. Behind them, the flames roared higher, feeding on dry wood and the barrels of kerosene they'd stored for the lamps. Eleanor and Samuel were already running, Whitlock half carrying his nephew, while Eleanor clutched a bundle of what looked like important papers to her chest. They made it about 100 yards before the powder went up. The explosion was massive, a white-hot flash that turned night into day for a single terrible instant. The shockwave hit like a physical thing, knocking Cole off his feet and slamming him into the hard ground. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. He tasted blood and dirt. He forced himself up, his vision blurred and swimming. Around him, the others were doing the same, picking themselves up, checking for injuries. Samuel was crying silently against his mother's shoulder. Eleanor's face was cut, blood running down her cheek, but she seemed otherwise unharmed. Where the storage shed had stood, there was now just a crater, still smoking. Pieces of burning wood had been thrown in every direction, some landing on other structures. The mine entrance had taken damage, timbers cracked, support shifted, but it was still standing. "Is everyone all right?" Cole's voice sounded strange and distant through the ringing in his ears. "I think so," Whitlock said. He was checking Samuel over, running his hands along the boy's arms and legs, looking for broken bones. "Danny? Here," the young man called out weakly. "I'm okay. Just got the wind knocked out of me." Henry had a nasty gash on his forehead, blood sheeting down his face, but he waved off concern. "I've had worse." "Raphael?" "Still breathing," the Mexican said, getting slowly to his feet. "But I think my ribs, they are not so happy with me." They gathered in the creek bed, watching as smaller fires burned themselves out across the settlement. The main cabin had caught some embers, but the roof was tin and wouldn't burn. Everything else was either destroyed or damaged. "They did this," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with fury. "Calder's men. They set the fire and ran." "Did anyone see them?" Cole asked. Everyone shook their heads. The explosion had been timed perfectly to catch them during the watch change, when attention was divided and men were tired from their shifts. "Professional work," Raphael observed. "They knew exactly when to strike and where to hurt us most." "We lost everything in that shed," Whitlock said numbly. "All our blasting supplies, the spare drill bits, He stopped, the weight of it overwhelming him. "We can't work the mine without those tools. We can't even make it safe to enter until we can shore up those damaged supports, and we don't have the materials to do that now." "So that's it?" Danny asked. "They beat us? We just give up and sell?" "No," Cole said firmly. "We don't give up. We adapt." "Adapt how?" Whitlock gestured at the destruction around them. "In case you haven't noticed, we just lost everything we need to keep operating." "We lost supplies," Cole corrected. "Supplies can be replaced. What we haven't lost is the mine itself, the claim, the legal right to be here. As long as we hold this ground, Calder doesn't win." "Easy to say," Henry muttered, pressing a rag to his bleeding forehead. Harder to do when you're sitting on worthless land with no way to work it. Cole understood the despair creeping into their voices. They'd been pushed to the edge, and now Calder had shoved them over it. Every instinct was probably telling them to surrender, to take whatever money they could get and walk away before someone got killed. But Cole had already died once. He'd faced the absolute darkness beyond the rope and come back. Fear was harder to hold on to when you'd already experienced the worst thing that could happen. "Listen to me," he said, his voice cutting through the shock and fear. "Calder did this because he's desperate. He offered you money, you refused. He threatened you, you didn't flinch. So now he's trying to destroy you because that's all he's got left. But he made a mistake." "What mistake?" Eleanor asked. "He thinks we'll break. He thinks this is enough to make you give up everything your husband died for." Cole looked at each of them in turn. "Is it?" Whitlock met his eyes for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. "No, James didn't break, and neither will I." "Good," Cole said. "Then here's what we do. Tomorrow at first light, Raphael and I ride to Copper Springs. We buy what supplies we can with whatever money we've got left. We also spread the word about what happened here. Make sure everyone knows Victor Calder is using violence and sabotage to steal land from honest people. Maybe the local marshal won't do anything, but the territorial government might care if enough noise gets made." "And if they don't care?" Henry asked. "Then we make sure Calder understands that every attack costs him something too. We stop playing defense and start making him worry about what we might do next." "You're talking about hitting back," Whitlock said carefully. "I'm talking about survival," Cole replied. "Calder thinks he's fighting against scared miners. We need to show him he's wrong." They spent the rest of the night salvaging what they could from the ruins and treating injuries. Eleanor cleaned and bandaged Henry's head wound, her hands steady despite everything. Danny and Raphael worked to make the damaged mine entrance safe enough that it wouldn't collapse further. Whitlock took inventory of what they had left. Precious little, it turned out. Cole stood watch alone, the Colt in his hand, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of Calder's men returning to finish what they'd started. The rage that had been building since he'd first seen the flames was cold and focused now. He'd tried to be better than the man he'd been. He'd tried to leave the violence behind. But some men only understood one language, and Victor Calder was forcing him to speak it again. Dawn came gray and cheerless, revealing the full extent of the damage in harsh morning light. The crater where the storage shed had been was still warm to the touch, the earth scorched black. Debris lay scattered everywhere, twisted metal, charred wood, the shattered remains of tools and equipment. Samuel emerged from the cabin and walked straight to the edge of the crater. He stood there staring down into it, his small face unreadable. Eleanor started to go to him, but Cole stopped her with a gentle hand. "Let him look," he said quietly. "He needs to see what they did, needs to understand what we're up against." "He's just a child," Eleanor protested. "He's a child who watched his father die and his mother nearly get killed. He's already had to grow up too fast. The least we can do is let him face it honestly instead of pretending everything's fine." They watched Samuel together, this boy who'd lost his voice to trauma and now stood witness to more violence, more destruction. After a long moment, Samuel turned and walked back to his mother. He looked up at her, and then he looked at Cole. And something in his eyes had changed. The fear was still there, but now there was something else too, something harder. The boy reached down and picked up a piece of charred wood from the ground. He carried it to a clear patch of dirt and began to draw, his small hands working with fierce concentration. When he stepped back, they could see what he'd made. A crude but recognizable drawing of the mine, with stick figures standing guard around it. "You want to help protect this place?" Cole asked gently. Samuel nodded once, sharp and certain. "Then you stay close to your mother and you do exactly what she tells you, when she tells you. Can you do that?" Another nod. "Good man," Cole said. And meant it. Raphael appeared with his saddlebags packed and ready. "The horses are prepared for the ride to Copper Springs. We should leave soon if we want to make it there and back before dark." Cole nodded. He turned to Whitlock. "While we're gone, I want you to write down everything that's happened. Every attack, every threat, every piece of sabotage. Include James's death and your suspicions about the collapse. We're going to need documentation if we want to make an official complaint to the territorial authorities." "You really think they'll listen?" Whitlock asked skeptically. "Maybe not. but we're going to give them the chance to do the right thing before we do what needs to be done. The ride to Copper Springs took most of the morning. Cole and Raphael traveled in silence, both men alert for any sign of ambush. Calder knew they'd need supplies, which meant the road to town was an obvious place to hit them while they were vulnerable. But they reached Copper Springs without incident, riding into a town that was bigger and more established than Redstone Ridge had been. The main street featured actual storefronts instead of tents, a proper hotel, 2 saloons, and the marshal's office prominently positioned near the center of everything. "We go to the marshal first," Cole said as they dismounted. "Get the complaint on record, even if he won't do anything about it." Marshal Thomas Grady was a heavy-set man in his 40s who wore his badge like it was a burden he'd grown tired of carrying. He listened to their story with the bored expression of someone who'd heard it all before and didn't much care to hear it again. "So let me get this straight," Grady said when Cole finished. "You're claiming Victor Calder blew up your storage shed, but you got no proof, no witnesses, no evidence, just suspicion and bad timing." "The timing's too perfect to be coincidence," Raphael argued. "First, the well gets poisoned, then Calder shows up with an offer, then our supplies get destroyed the same night we refuse to sell." "Could be coincidence," Grady said with a shrug. "Could be you got enemies you don't even know about. Could be one of your own people got careless with the blasting powder and doesn't want to admit it." "That's ridiculous," Cole said. "Is it?" Grady leaned back in his chair. "I've known Victor Calder for 20 years. He's a respected businessman, employs half this territory, pays his taxes on time. You, on the other hand, are a stranger who showed up with a rope burn on his neck and a dead man's name. Yeah, I know who you really are, Caleb Vance. Word travels fast in these parts." Cole felt the familiar cold anger settling over him. "Who I was doesn't change what's happening now." "Maybe not. But it does make me wonder why I should take your word over Calder's." Grady stood up, clearly done with the conversation. "I'll file your complaint, but unless you can bring me real proof, there's nothing I can do." They left the marshal's office knowing they'd wasted their time. Grady was either being paid by Calder or was too scared to stand against him. Either way, the law wasn't going to help them. "We need those supplies," Raphael said as they walked toward the general store. Whether or not the marshal will help, the store was well stocked, everything from mining equipment to food staples to ammunition. Cole mentally calculated what they could afford with the money they had left, trying to prioritize essentials. They needed blasting powder, fuses, timber for repairs, tools to replace what they'd lost. They were loading their purchases into saddlebags when a man approached them on the street. He was older, maybe 70, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his entire life working with his hands. He moved with the stiff gait of old injuries poorly healed. "You're the men from the Whitlock mine," the old man said. It wasn't a question. "Who's asking?" Cole replied. "Name's William Penn. I used to own a mine about 10 miles north of yours. Calder wanted it. I wouldn't sell." He gestured to his leg, the one he was favoring. "Had an accident in my tunnel. Cave-in, they said. Broke my leg in 3 places, crushed my hip. By the time I got out of the hospital, my workers had all been scared off and I couldn't work the mine myself anymore. Had to sell to Calder for pennies on the dollar just to pay my medical bills." "I'm sorry that happened to you," Raphael said. "Don't be sorry. Be smart." Penn leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "There are others like me. Charlie Dawson lost his claim after his house burned down with his wife still in it. Martin Shaw's son got shot by what they called road bandits, but everyone knows it was Calder's men sending a message. Half a dozen small operators have been forced out over the last 5 years, one way or another." "Did anyone try to fight back?" Cole asked. "A few. They're all dead now, or scared enough they might as well be." Penn looked at them with eyes that had seen too much and understood more. "Calder's building an empire, and he doesn't care who he has to crush to do it. You might think you're different, that you can stand up to him where others failed. But you can't. Nobody can. Best thing you can do is take whatever he's offering and get out while you still can." "We can't do that," Raphael said simply. Penn studied them both, seeing the determination in their faces, and something like pity crossed his weathered features. "Then you're going to die on that land, same as the others. And Calder will buy your mine at auction, and nobody will remember your names a year from now." He walked away, his uneven gait taking him down the street and into one of the saloons. Cole and Raphael stood in silence, processing what they'd just learned. "He's wrong," Raphael said finally. We're not going to die. No, Cole agreed. We're not, but Calder might. They finished loading the supplies and started the ride back to the mine. Cole's mind was working through the problem from every angle. Calder had money, men, and the protection of a corrupt marshal. He'd been running this same pattern for years. Intimidate, sabotage, attack, then buy the land cheap when the owners were too scared or broken to continue. But Calder had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed the man standing against him now was just another desperate miner trying to protect a failing operation. He didn't understand that Cole had nothing left to lose. No reputation to protect, no future to safeguard, no fear of consequences because he'd already faced the ultimate consequence and survived it. They were about 5 miles from the mine when Raphael suddenly pulled up his horse, staring at something ahead. Cole followed his gaze and saw smoke rising in the distance, thin and dark, coming from the direction of the settlement. No, Raphael breathed, not again. They spurred their horses forward, covering the remaining distance at a full gallop. As they got closer, Cole could see it wasn't the massive conflagration from the previous night. This was smaller, more controlled, almost like a signal fire. They rode into the settlement to find Whitlock and Henry standing guard over 3 men bound and sitting on the ground. Danny stood nearby with a rifle, looking nervous but resolute. The smoke was coming from a pile of their would-be attackers' equipment burning in a controlled fire. What happened? Cole asked, dismounting quickly. They came about an hour after you left, Whitlock explained. Thought we'd be easy pickings with you and Raphael gone. They were wrong, he gestured to the bound men. We caught these 3 trying to plant more explosives near the mine entrance. Cole approached the prisoners, studying their faces. They were hard men, the kind who did violence for pay and didn't lose sleep over it. But right now they looked scared, which meant Whitlock and the others had given them reason to be. Who sent you? Cole asked the nearest man. Go to hell, the man spat. Cole drew the Colt in one smooth motion and pressed it against the man's forehead. Wrong answer, try again. The man's eyes went wide. We don't know. We just take orders, get paid, don't ask questions. Who gives the orders? A man named Garrett. He works for Mr. Calder, handles the rough jobs. But we never met Calder himself, never got orders directly from him. That's the truth, I swear. Cole believed him. Calder was too smart to get his own hands dirty with the details. He'd have layers of people between himself and the actual violence, enough plausible deniability to keep the law off his back. What were you supposed to do after you planted the explosives? Make it look like you got careless with the blasting powder again. Another accident, nobody's fault. The man licked his lips nervously. Look, we were just doing a job. We ain't got nothing personal against you people. Nothing personal, Cole repeated softly. You were going to blow up this mine with people inside, kill families, destroy their livelihood, and you've got nothing personal against them. That's just business, the man said, then seemed to realize how that sounded. I mean, we wouldn't have actually hurt nobody. We were told to set it when the mine was empty. You're lying, Eleanor said from the cabin doorway. Samuel stood beside her, and for the first time since the attack on the road, the boy's eyes showed something other than fear. They showed anger. Cole holstered the Colt and turned to Whitlock. What do you want to do with them? The legal thing would be to turn them over to Marshal Grady, Whitlock said, the marshal who wouldn't even file a proper complaint against Calder. Raphael shook his head. These men would be free by sundown, back here by tomorrow to finish what they started. Then we handle it ourselves, Henry said grimly. Frontier justice. Make an example of them so Calder thinks twice about sending more. No, Cole said firmly. We're not murderers. That's what separates us from them. So what then? Danny asked. We just let them go? Cole looked at the 3 bound men, then at the settlement they'd tried to destroy, then back at the men again. An idea was forming, risky but potentially effective. We let them go, he said slowly. But first we make sure they deliver a message to their boss. He crouched down in front of the 3 prisoners. Here's how this works. You ride back to wherever Garrett told you to report after this job was done. You tell him exactly what happened, that you were caught, that we're not scared, that we're not leaving. And you tell him that the next group of men who attack this mine won't be tied up and sent home. They'll be buried here, and we'll use their graves as property markers. He'll just send more men, one of the other prisoners said. More men, better armed, with orders to kill you all. Let him try, Cole said. Every man he sends is one more witness to his crimes. Eventually, someone's going to ask questions about why Victor Calder needs so many guns just to buy a simple mining claim. Eventually, the territorial government's going to notice. And when they do, I'll make sure they know exactly where to look. They cut the prisoners loose and sent them riding south with nothing but their horses and the clothes on their backs. The men left quickly, grateful to escape with their lives, not looking back even once. You think that'll work? Whitlock asked as they watched the riders disappear. That message of yours? No, Cole admitted, but it buys us time. Calder will have to regroup, think through his next move. And while he's doing that, we fortify this place and make ourselves as hard to kill as possible. They spent the rest of the day and into the evening doing exactly that. Using the supplies Cole and Raphael had brought from Copper Springs, they reinforced the mine entrance, installed better locks on the cabins, created sight lines that would make it harder for anyone to approach unseen. They moved the ammunition and blasting powder into the mine itself, storing it deep enough that no external fire could reach it. Eleanor worked on the documentation Whitlock had written, making copies in her neat hand so they'd have multiple records of everything that had happened. Samuel helped where he could, still silent but more engaged than he'd been since the trauma on the road. As darkness fell, they gathered around the fire for a meal of beans and salt pork. Everyone was exhausted, running on determination and spite more than actual energy. But there was something different in the air now, a hardness, a refusal to bend. I've been thinking, Henry said as they ate, about what that old man told you in Copper Springs, about all the others who tried to stand against Calder and failed. What about it? Cole asked. They all fought alone, each mine owner trying to protect their own claim, not working together. Maybe that's why they lost. You thinking about finding the others? Raphael asked. The ones Calder hasn't completely crushed yet? Making an alliance? Something like that. Strength in numbers. If we can get 3 or 4 other operations to stand with us, make it clear we won't be picked off one by one, Calder might reconsider his tactics. It wasn't a bad idea. Cole could see the logic in it. Calder was powerful, but he was also one man trying to control a vast territory. If multiple claims stood against him simultaneously, he'd have to divide his resources, spread his men thin. It's worth trying, Whitlock said. First light tomorrow, I'll ride out and talk to the nearest operations, see who still has enough fight left in them to make a stand. Not you, Cole said. You need to stay here, protect Eleanor and Samuel. I'll go. I'm the one Calder knows he can't scare off easy. He knows who you are, Eleanor pointed out. That rope burn is distinctive. The moment anyone sees it, they'll know Caleb Vance is still alive. Let them know, Cole said. Maybe the fact that I survived a hanging will convince them they can survive Calder. They talked late into the night, making plans, discussing strategies, trying to find any angle that might give them an advantage in a fight that seemed impossible to win. Eventually, exhaustion won out over conversation, and they dispersed to their cabins for whatever sleep they could manage. Cole lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led him to this moment. A month ago, he'd been a ghost, a dead man walking away from his execution with nothing but a borrowed horse and Marshal Pike's charity. Now he was preparing to go to war against one of the most powerful men in the territory, defending people he'd known for less than a week, risking the second life he'd been mysteriously given for a cause that wasn't even his. But it felt right in a way nothing had felt right since the rope had snapped tight around his neck. Maybe this was what he'd come back for. Maybe this was the purpose he'd been searching for in the empty days of wandering. Or maybe he was just a fool who couldn't help but choose violence over sense, even when he'd promised himself he'd be different. Either way, come morning he'd ride out and try to build an army from the broken men Victor Calder had already defeated once. He'd try to convince them that this time could be different, that together they could stand against a man who'd crushed them individually. And if he failed, if Calder proved too strong and too ruthless to overcome, at least Cole would go down fighting for something that mattered instead of running from everything that didn't. Through the thin cabin walls, he could hear Samuel coughing in his sleep, a small reminder of the innocent lives hanging in the balance. Cole closed his eyes and tried to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and probably new violence. The man who died on the gallows would have welcomed it. The man he was trying to become dreaded it. But the man he actually was, caught somewhere between those two extremes, simply accepted it as the price of the choice he'd made to stand and fight instead of walking away. Cole rode out at dawn, following the directions Whitlock had given him to the nearest mining claims that hadn't yet been completely crushed under Calder's boot. The first was owned by a man named Jacob Morrison, whose operation sat in a canyon about 12 miles northeast. The second belonged to the Chen family, Chinese immigrants who'd been working a placer claim along a tributary creek for 3 years. The Morrison claim looked abandoned at first glance. The equipment sat idle, covered with dust and disuse. But as Cole approached, a rifle barrel emerged from the window of the main cabin, tracking his movement. "That's close enough," a voice called out. "State your business." "Name's Cole Brennan. I'm working the Whitlock mine. Tom Whitlock sent me to talk to you about Victor Calder." A pause. Then, "You the one they say survived hanging?" "Yeah." "Prove it." Cole turned his collar down, exposing the rope burn that circled his throat like a brand. The rifle barrel withdrew slightly. "Wait there." Minutes passed before Jacob Morrison emerged from the cabin. He was younger than Cole expected, maybe 25, with the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much violence too soon. His right hand was wrapped in bandages, and he moved stiffly, favoring his left side. "Calder's men did that?" Cole asked, gesturing to the injuries. "3 weeks ago. Came in the night, beat me near to death, told me I had one more chance to sell before they came back and finished the job." Morrison's voice was flat, emotionless. "I've been living in that cabin with a loaded rifle ever since, too scared to work the claim, too stubborn to leave." "Whitlock's organizing resistance," Cole said. "Mine owners standing together instead of getting picked off one at a time. We need men willing to fight back." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Fight back? Against Calder? You've got no idea what you're up against. He's got money, guns, and the law in his pocket. What have you got?" "Stubbornness," Cole said, "and the fact that I've already died once, so I'm not particularly afraid of doing it again." "That's insane." "Maybe, but I'd rather die standing up than live on my knees." Cole met Morrison's eyes steadily. "Your claim still producing?" "Was before they shut me down. Good silver vein could run for years with proper equipment." "Then help us fight for it. Calder wins if we let him win. But if we stand together, if we make it too costly for him to keep attacking, maybe he backs off and finds easier prey elsewhere." Morrison stared at him for a long moment. "You really believe that?" "I believe it's our only chance. And if we lose, if Calder crushes us anyway, then at least we'll know we tried." Cole paused. "What's the alternative? Spend the rest of your life hiding in that cabin, watching your claim sit idle, waiting for the day Calder's men come back to finish what they started?" Something shifted in Morrison's expression. The fear was still there, but now there was a spark of the anger he'd been suppressing. "What do you need from me?" "Come to the Whitlock mine tomorrow at noon. Bring whatever weapons you've got and whatever fight you've got left. We're making a stand, and we need every man who's willing." Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll be there." The Chen family operation was different. They'd been harassed and threatened, but not yet violently attacked, possibly because Calder had underestimated them or thought they'd be easier to scare off without the expense of hiring guns. The family patriarch, Chen Wei, listened to Cole's proposal while his 3 sons stood nearby, all of them lean and hard from years of physical labor. "We know of Whitlock Mine," Chen Wei said in careful English. "We hear about the troubles. Very dangerous. Fighting a rich man." "More dangerous not to fight," Cole replied. "Eventually Calder will come for your claim too. Better to face him together than wait for him to pick us off alone." Chen Wei spoke in rapid Chinese to his sons. They responded, their voices overlapping, clearly arguing about the best course of action. Finally, Chen Wei turned back to Cole. "My sons, they say we should run. Go to California. Start over where Calder cannot reach." He paused. "But I am old. Too old to start over. Too old to run from bullies. We will stand with you." "Your sons don't have to fight if they don't want to," Cole said. "They will fight," Chen Wei said firmly. "This is our land, our home. Family stands together." By the time Cole returned to the Whitlock mine that evening, he'd secured commitments from 4 operations: Morrison, the Chens, a widow named Sarah Hutchins, who ran a small claim with her 2 teenage daughters, and a partnership of 3 brothers named Kelly, who'd been terrorized but not yet broken. It wasn't an army, but it was more than nothing. They'll all be here tomorrow at noon, Cole reported as they gathered around the fire. After that, we make our stand. What exactly does that mean? Danny asked. What's the plan? Cole had been thinking about that all day during his rides between claims. Calder's been using fear and isolation against us. He hits one mine at a time, makes sure the owners feel alone and helpless. We take that advantage away by consolidating. Everyone brings their valuables, their important papers, anything they can't afford to lose. We make this mine the rallying point. We dig in here and dare Calder to come take it. You're inviting a siege, Henry said. I'm forcing Calder's hand, Cole corrected. Right now he's fighting a dozen small battles he can't lose. We turn it into one big battle he might not win. Make him commit his resources all at once instead of bleeding us dry piece by piece. And if he brings enough men to overwhelm us, Eleanor asked, then we make it cost him so much that he decides we're not worth the trouble. Men talk, word spreads. If Calder has to spend a fortune in blood and money to take one mine, other claims across the territory are going to think twice before selling cheap. His whole business model depends on easy victories and intimidation. We take that away from him. Raphael nodded slowly. It could work, or it could get us all killed. At least we'd die on our feet. Morrison's voice came from the darkness beyond the firelight. He stepped into view, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Couldn't wait until tomorrow. Figured you could use an extra gun tonight in case Calder decides to hit you before you're ready. Whitlock stood and clasped Morrison's hand. Good to have you here. Don't thank me yet. I haven't been much use to anyone since they broke 3 of my fingers. Morrison held up his bandaged hand. But I can still shoot left-handed, and I can still stand watch. They gave Morrison a place by the fire and a plate of food. As he ate, more arrivals trickled in. The Chen family showed up just after nightfall, their wagon loaded with supplies and valuables. Sarah Hutchins and her daughters arrived an hour later, the girls looking scared but determined. The Kelly brothers were the last, riding in well after dark with grim expressions and an arsenal of weapons that suggested they'd been preparing for this fight for a long time. By midnight, the Whitlock mine had transformed from a struggling family operation into something resembling a frontier fort. Men stood watch at intervals around the perimeter. Families huddled in the cabins, trying to get whatever sleep they could manage. Weapons were cleaned and loaded, ammunition counted and distributed. Cole stood alone near the mine entrance, looking out at the darkness and thinking about what was coming. They'd gathered maybe 15 people capable of fighting, plus the children and elderly who'd need protecting. Against Calder's resources, that wasn't much. But it was more than nothing, and nothing was what they'd had before. Can't sleep either? Eleanor's voice came from behind him. Cole turned to find her wrapped in a shawl against the night chill, Samuel sleeping in her arms. The boy's face was peaceful in sleep, untroubled by the nightmares that probably haunted his waking hours. Too much to think about, Cole admitted. I keep wondering if James would approve of this. If he'd think we were being brave or just foolish. She adjusted Samuel's weight in her arms. He was always so careful, so deliberate about everything. He wouldn't fight unless he was sure he could win. And you think he'd counsel surrender? I think he'd counsel survival, and I don't know if what we're doing qualifies. She looked at Cole directly. You could still leave, you know. This isn't your fight. You don't owe us anything. I killed 4 men to save you and Samuel, Cole said quietly. That makes it my fight whether I want it to be or not. Calder knows who I am, knows I'm here. If I run now, he'll hunt me down anyway, just to make an example. At least here I've got people watching my back. Is that the only reason you're staying? Cole thought about it. No, I'm staying because for the first time since I walked away from that gallows, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, something worth the second chance I got. He touched the rope burn at his throat. I died as a killer. I'd like to live as something better than that. Eleanor smiled sadly. We're all trying to be better than we were. James used to say that's the frontier's greatest gift, the chance to become whoever we choose to be, regardless of who we were before. I think he'd like you, Mr. Brennan. I think he'd appreciate what you're trying to do here. Samuel stirred in her arms, mumbling something in his sleep. Eleanor hushed him gently, rocking him back to deeper rest. Has he said anything yet? Cole asked. Not a word, but I catch him trying sometimes. His mouth moves like he wants to speak, but nothing comes out. The doctor said trauma can do that. Lock the voice away until the mind feels safe enough to release it. He'll speak again, Cole said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. When this is over, when he knows he's safe, the words will come back. I hope you're right. She returned to this cabin with Samuel, leaving Cole alone with the darkness and his thoughts. The night passed slowly, measured in watch changes and false alarms, shadows that turned out to be nothing, sounds that could have been threats but weren't. By dawn, everyone was exhausted from vigilance, running on coffee and nervous energy. The morning brought more arrivals. Word had spread somehow, perhaps through the grapevine of miners and workers who knew what Calder was doing, even if they were too scared to speak openly about it. A few came offering supplies they could spare. Others brought information about Calder's movements, rumors of his plans. One man, an aging prospector named Dutch, brought the most valuable intelligence of all. Calder's gathering his forces, Dutch reported, accepting the coffee Eleanor offered him. Been calling in men from all his operations. Word is he's planning something big, something final. He's tired of this taking so long, wants it over with. How many men? Cole asked. 20, maybe 25, all armed, all experienced. He's paying triple wages for this job, which means he's serious about it. The numbers weren't good. Even with everyone they'd gathered, they'd be outnumbered and outgunned. Cole could see the same calculation happening in everyone's faces, the fear creeping back in as the reality of what they faced became clear. When? Whitlock asked. Day after tomorrow, from what I heard. They're staging at Calder's smelting facility, getting organized. Calder himself is going to lead them, wants to be there when you finally break. He's that confident, Raphael said. He's that arrogant, Dutch corrected. Man's used to winning, doesn't believe a bunch of miners and families can stand against him. The old prospector looked at Cole. You really the one who survived hanging? Yeah. Then maybe you're crazy enough to survive this too. They spent the day preparing for the attack that was coming. The mine entrance was barricaded with everything they could spare: timber, rocks, overturned wagons. Firing positions were created that would give them cover while exposing attackers to crossfire. The women and children were moved into the mine itself, deep enough that they'd be safe from bullets and fire. Sarah Hutchins surprised everyone by revealing she was a crack shot with a rifle, having grown up hunting with her father. My girls can load and pass ammunition, she said. We'll hold the eastern approach. The Kelly brothers took the western side, their coordinated movements suggesting they'd fought together before. The Chen sons positioned themselves on the high ground above the mine, where they'd have clear sightlines on anyone approaching. Morrison, despite his injuries, insisted on taking a position near the main barricade where he could shoot left-handed. As the sun began to set on the second day, Cole did a final check of everyone's positions. They were as ready as they'd ever be. Against 25 professional guns, it probably wouldn't be enough. But it was what they had. He was heading back to the main cabin when Samuel appeared in front of him, blocking his path. The boy looked up at him with those serious eyes, then slowly lifted his hands. He pressed both palms together, then pulled them apart, making a motion like something breaking or exploding. You want to help? Cole asked gently. Samuel nodded vigorously. He pointed to the mine entrance, then to himself, then made the explosive motion again. It took Cole a moment to understand. Then he realized what the boy was suggesting. The blasting powder they'd stored deep in the mine, the charges they could set to bring down the tunnel if they needed to make a last stand. You want to be ready to collapse the mine entrance if they breach our defenses, Cole said. Trap them inside so they can't get to your mother and the others. Another nod. Samuel's hands moved quickly now, gesturing to show how he understood the mechanics of it, how to set the charges, how to time the fuses. James had taught his son well before he died. That's smart thinking, Cole said. But if we blow the entrance, we trap ourselves inside too. We'd be sealed in the mine with limited air and no way out. Samuel's expression didn't change. His message was clear. Better trapped alive than killed by Calder's men. All right, Cole agreed. But you don't set those charges unless I give you the signal. Understand? Your mother would never forgive me if I let you blow yourself up trying to save everyone else. Samuel's face split in the first genuine smile Cole had seen from him. The boy reached out and gripped Cole's hand, squeezing it with surprising strength for someone so young. Then he turned and ran back to the mine entrance, already planning where to place the charges. Eleanor emerged from the cabin as Cole watched her son disappear into the darkness. What was that about? Your son just volunteered for demolition duty, Cole said. Wants to set charges to collapse the mine entrance if things go bad. Eleanor paled. Absolutely not. He's 8 years old. He's also the only one besides you who knows how James designed those support timbers. If we need to bring them down fast, Samuel knows exactly where to place the charges for maximum effect. Cole put a hand on her shoulder. I won't let him take unnecessary risks, but if it comes down to sealing the mine or letting Calder's men reach the families hiding inside, I need someone who can do the job right. He's just a child, Eleanor whispered, but she was wavering. He's a child who's already seen too much. Let him help protect the people he loves. Let him have some control over what happens instead of being helpless again. She was silent for a long time. Finally, she nodded. But you promise me, that you'll get him out safe if things go wrong. I promise, Cole said, and meant it. The attack came at dawn just as the light was beginning to spread across the eastern sky. Cole heard them before he saw them, the thunder of hoofbeats, the shouts of men working themselves up for violence. He'd been awake all night on watch, and now he fired a single shot into the air to alert everyone else. The defenders scrambled to their positions as Calder's force appeared on the horizon. 27 men on horseback, all armed with rifles and pistols, riding in formation like a military unit. At their head rode Victor Calder himself, dressed in his expensive suit like he was attending a business meeting instead of a massacre. They stopped just outside rifle range, and Calder rode forward alone, his hands visible and empty. Tom Whitlock, he called out. This is your last chance. Surrender now. Accept my offer, and everyone walks away alive. Refuse, and I'll burn this place to the ground with everyone in it. Whitlock stepped into view behind the barricade, his rifle held steady. This is my land, Calder. Legally purchased, legally worked. You've got no right to it. I've got 27 men and enough firepower to level this settlement, Calder shouted back. That's all the right I need. You're outgunned and outnumbered. Be smart, Tom. Think about your sister and her boy. I am thinking about them, Whitlock's voice cracked with emotion. I'm thinking they deserve better than a world where men like you can steal and murder and get away with it because you've got money and guns. Calder's expression hardened. So be it. You chose this. He turned his horse and rode back to his men. Cole could see him giving orders, positioning his forces for the assault. Here they come, Raphael said quietly. The attack began with gunfire, bullets hammering into the barricades and singing off rocks. Calder's men had dismounted and were advancing on foot, using cover where they could find it, laying down suppressing fire while others moved closer. They were professionals, coordinated and dangerous. Cole aimed carefully and fired, his bullet catching one of the attackers in the shoulder and spinning him around. Sarah Hutchins' rifle cracked from the eastern position, and another man went down. The Chen brothers were firing from above, their bullets kicking up dust around the advancing men. But there were too many of them, and they kept coming. They reached the first barricade and began tearing it apart, creating gaps they could push through. Cole shifted his fire, trying to drive them back, but for every man he hit, 2 more took his place. Fall back to secondary positions, Cole shouted. They retreated in stages, making Calder's men pay for every foot of ground. Henry took a bullet in the leg but kept firing, propped against a timber. One of the Kelly brothers went down hard, blood spreading across his chest. Morrison's rifle jammed, and he switched to a pistol, firing with his offhand until he ran out of ammunition. The fight turned into chaos, close-quarters combat with no clear lines. Smoke from gunfire filled the air, making it hard to see friend from enemy. Cole found himself back-to-back with Raphael, both of them firing at shapes that emerged from the smoke. A bullet tugged at Cole's sleeve. Another burned across his ribs, drawing blood but not stopping him. He dropped the Colt when it ran empty and grabbed a rifle from a fallen defender, never stopping, never giving Calder's men a moment to consolidate their advantage. But they were being pushed back toward the mine entrance, step by bloody step. Cole could see it happening, could feel the battle turning against them. In minutes, they'd be overrun completely. Samuel, he shouted toward the mine entrance. Now! The explosion was massive, perfectly placed. The support timbers inside the mine entrance shattered simultaneously, bringing down tons of rock and earth. But instead of sealing the mine, the collapse created something different, a rock slide that swept outward, cascading down the hillside directly into Calder's advancing forces. Men screamed as the avalanche hit them, knocking them down, burying some, scattering others. The attack broke apart in confusion and panic. Those who weren't caught in the rock slide retreated, trying to regroup. Cole stared at the mine entrance, which remained open, the collapse having been directed outward rather than inward. Samuel emerged from the darkness, his face smudged with soot, a triumphant grin on his young face. The boy had improvised, had changed the plan to create a weapon instead of a seal. "Cease fire!" Cole shouted to the defenders. "Hold position!" The shooting stopped raggedly, both sides catching their breath and taking stock. Calder's forces had been cut nearly in half. 8 men lay buried or injured under the rock slide. Others had fled. Only about 12 remained standing, and they looked shaken. Calder himself was on his feet, his expensive suit torn and dusty, his face twisted with rage. "You think this changes anything?" he screamed. "I'll bring 100 men next time, 200. I'll hire an army if I have to." "No, you won't," a new voice called out. Everyone turned to see Marshal Grady riding in from the south, accompanied by 3 territorial marshals in official uniforms. Behind them came a wagon carrying William Penn, Charlie Dawson, Martin Shaw, and half a dozen other mine owners who'd been forced out by Calder's tactics. "Victor Calder," Grady said formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, arson, sabotage, and about a dozen other charges the territorial prosecutor is very interested in discussing with you." Calder's face went white. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can," one of the territorial marshals said. He gestured to the wagon. "Turns out when you terrorize enough people, eventually some of them get brave enough to testify. We've got sworn statements from 15 different witnesses about your tactics. Plus, we've got 3 of your men who were captured at the Whitlock mine, who are very eager to testify against you in exchange for reduced sentences." "They're lying," Calder insisted. "This is a conspiracy. Save it for the trial." Grady cut him off. He looked at Cole with something like respect. "Your friend Dutch came to me last night, told me everything that was happening, made me realize I'd been looking the other way too long. The territorial office sent these marshals to investigate based on the documentation Mrs. Whitlock prepared. Turns out detailed records of every attack, every threat, every sabotage. That's exactly the kind of evidence prosecutors love." Calder's remaining men were being disarmed and rounded up by the territorial marshals. The fight was over, not because one side had crushed the other, but because the law had finally decided to do its job. Cole lowered his rifle, exhaustion washing over him. Around him, the other defenders were doing the same, some laughing with relief, others crying, all of them marked by the battle they'd survived. Eleanor ran from the mine entrance and swept Samuel into her arms, holding him so tight, the boy probably couldn't breathe. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," she said, her voice breaking. "That was the bravest, stupidest thing I've ever seen." "It worked," Samuel said, his voice small and rusty from disuse, but clear as a bell. "I made the rocks fall on the bad men, Mama, like David and Goliath." Everyone froze. Samuel had spoken. After weeks of traumatized silence, the boy had finally found his voice again. Eleanor started crying in earnest, hugging her son and laughing and sobbing all at once. Whitlock joined them, and then Raphael, and soon it was a mass of people celebrating the fact that they'd survived and won, and that Samuel could speak again. Cole stood apart, watching them, feeling the weight of the Colt in his hand. He'd killed at least 3 men in the fight, maybe more. The violence he'd tried to leave behind had claimed him again. But this time it felt different. This time it had meant something. He walked to the edge of the settlement and looked out at the destruction, the bodies being recovered from the rock slide, the wounded being tended to, the smoke still rising from a dozen small fires. War, even a small one, was ugly. "You did good," Whitlock said, coming to stand beside him. "You saved us all." "I just did what needed doing," Cole replied. "That's exactly what heroes do." Whitlock paused. "I know you're probably thinking about moving on now that this is over, but we could use a man like you here. We'll be rebuilding, expanding. There's a future here if you want to be part of it." Cole thought about it, about the mine that still needed working, the land that still needed defending, the people who'd become something like family in the space of a few violent weeks, about Eleanor who looked at him like he was more than just the sum of his sins, about Samuel who'd found his voice fighting to protect the people he loved. "I'll stay," he said. "At least for a while. See how things shake out." "Fair enough," Whitlock said. "Fair enough." The next weeks brought change faster than anyone expected. Calder's trial became territorial news. His empire systematically dismantled as prosecutors uncovered years of illegal activity. The mine owners he'd terrorized began rebuilding, working together now instead of in isolation. The Whitlock mine became the center of a cooperative effort, multiple claims pooling resources to invest in better equipment and more efficient processing. Eleanor took over the business side of the operation, proving to have her late husband's head for numbers and strategy. Samuel recovered his voice fully and became the settlement's unofficial messenger, running between operations with news and updates. The boy stuck close to Cole whenever possible, following him around and asking endless questions about everything from mining techniques to gunfighting. Morrison's hand healed enough for him to return to his own claim, but he came by regularly to help with larger projects. The Chen family expanded their operation with loans from the cooperative, their sons learning new techniques from the more experienced miners. Sarah Hutchins discovered she had a talent for assaying ore, and soon everyone was bringing her their samples for evaluation. Cole worked the mine alongside the others, learning the rhythms of the labor, the satisfaction of pulling silver from the earth through skill and determination rather than violence. His past as Caleb Vance became an open secret that nobody much cared about. Out here, what mattered was who you were now, not who you'd been. On a clear morning 3 months after the battle, Cole stood at the mine entrance watching the sun rise over the valley. The rope burn on his neck had faded to a pale scar, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. His hands were calloused from honest work, his body leaner and harder than it had been when he'd ridden away from Redstone Ridge. Eleanor joined him, coffee cups in hand. She'd taken to doing this most mornings, sharing the quiet before the day's work began. "Samuel asked me something last night," she said, handing him a cup. "What's that?" "He wanted to know if you were staying for good or if you were still planning to leave someday." She sipped her coffee. "I told him I didn't know, that you were your own man and got to make your own choices." "What do you want?" Cole asked. She smiled. "I want you to stay. Not because we need protection anymore. Calder's in prison and his organization is scattered, but because we want you here, because you're part of this place now, part of this family we're building." Cole thought about the man he'd been, the killer who'd left 17 bodies across 3 territories. That man was dead, buried in a grave in Redstone Ridge that bore his name even though his body had never occupied it. The man standing here now was someone different, someone better, maybe, or at least someone trying to be. "I'll stay," he said, "long as you'll have me." "Good," Eleanor said simply. She kissed his cheek, her lips warm against his scarred skin. "Because this is where you belong, Cole Brennan. This is home." Samuel came running out of the cabin, excited about something he'd discovered. He grabbed Cole's hand and pulled him toward the mine, chattering about a new vein he thought he'd found, about the future of the operation, about all the possibilities ahead. Cole let himself be pulled along, a smile touching his lips. He'd been given a second chance at life when by all rights he should have died. He'd wasted it for a while, wandering aimlessly, trying to figure out who he was supposed to be now. But here, in this hard land among these hard people who'd chosen to stand and fight instead of surrender, he'd finally found the answer. He was whoever he chose to be. The past didn't define him. The rope hadn't killed him. And the future was his to write, one day at a time, one choice at a time. As he descended into the mine with Samuel chattering beside him and Eleanor's laughter echoing from above, Cole understood something that had eluded him since the day he'd woken up breathing after being hanged. He wasn't a ghost walking among the living. He wasn't a dead man searching for purpose. He was simply alive. Fully, completely, messily alive in all the ways that mattered. And that was enough. Years later, travelers passing through the territory would hear stories about the settlement near the old Whitlock mine, about the community that had stood against a tyrant and won, about the cooperative that had brought prosperity to a region that had known only struggle, about the man with the rope scar who'd helped build it all, who'd traded his guns for a shovel and his reputation for an honest name. Some said he'd been a famous outlaw. Others claimed he'd been a marshal in disguise. A few insisted he'd actually died and come back as something other than human. But the people who knew him best, Eleanor and Samuel, Tom and Raphael, Henry, and all the others who'd fought beside him, they knew the truth. Cole Brennan was just a man who'd been given a second chance and had decided to use it for something good, who'd chosen to build instead of destroy, to protect instead of terrorize, to love instead of hate. And in the end, that choice made all the difference. The mine prospered. The valley grew. Children were born and raised hearing stories of the day their parents had stood against impossible odds and won. The land that Victor Calder had tried to steal became a symbol of resistance, of ordinary people refusing to be crushed by power and greed. And through it all, Cole worked and lived and loved, making peace with the violence of his past by building a future worth the price he'd paid for it. The man who'd been hanged in Redstone Ridge was dead and buried. The man who'd survived was alive and free. And that was the greatest victory of all.